Hi, my name is Reena. Welcome back to my YouTube channel where we focus on giving practical tips and techniques to move into the new consciousness in a calm and comfortable manner, and also in embracing the high vibrational energies. Today I'm pleased to announce that we have a guest presenter. He is Andy Tomlinson and he's my husband. He is the director of the Past Life Regression Academy, and he is a champion in using high vibrational techniques for moving into the new consciousness. He'll be focusing on how to grow high vibrational organic food, and he'll be touching on two parts. The first part is he'll be talking about how to establish high vibrational energy grid in the garden before you actually start planting. This enables all the food to absorb the high vibrational energies from the earth. The second thing that he will talk about are tips and techniques to enhance growing high vibrational organic food.
Okay, first of all, we want to create a high vibrational area in the garden where the fruit and vegetables are grown. Now the planet has areas of high vibrational energy called energy portals and energy vortexes, and it has flows of energy between these called ley lines. And a ley line can almost be thought of like water flowing from one area to another, and we really want to be able to tap into this so we can bring areas of high vibrational energy to our garden area. So to do that, the first thing we need is something called a base crystal. This is an example of a base crystal. And the idea of the base crystal is it gets linked into areas of high vibrational energy, and then it's linked to slightly smaller crystals which can be placed around the perimeter of the garden. So let's talk about how to go about doing this. Well, the first thing to do is take a trip to a good crystal shop. And then you need to make the intent to look for a base crystal. And if you feel yourself intuitively drawn to a crystal, it doesn't need to be as big as the one that I showed you. This is quite a large one. Size isn't important, or even the crystal material. This happens to be quartz. If you check with a pendulum, you can confirm whether it's the right crystal for your based crystal. And if you're not too sure about using a pendulum, or you want to be quite sure, well, just invite a friend along to confirm it. So the first thing to do then is to get your base crystal, and then to start looking for crystals you can put around the perimeter. In the example I gave you, I had 4 of them. On a larger garden you may need more. And again, the best thing to do is just to use a pendulum and ask the question, do I need 4 or more crystals? Do I need 6 or more crystals, or so on, until you know exactly what the number of crystals are. And again, check you've got exactly the right crystals. And then the next stage is to make sure you clean all your crystals. And there's 2 ways of doing it. You can either do it through running water just to wash off any residue energy that the crystals may have been collected, or you can do it by intent of put the crystals in your hand, and by intent ask for energy from the highest level of source to come down through your hands to the crystals and clean them energetically. Or you can do both. So once you've got the crystals clear, then the next thing to do is to find the location for your base crystal. And again, this is something that is best done intuitively. If you've got a feeling whereabouts it's going to go, you can just check with a pendulum, is this the right location for it to go? And if it's not, then try one or two other areas. Normally it'll be somewhere central that obviously won't get in the way logistically of mowing lawns and things of that nature. And then when you've got that correctly positioned, then the thing to do is to link that to one of the earth centers. And the best way of doing this is by intent. So you simply hold the crystal in your hand, and then you make the intent for the crystal to be connected to an energy center that you know. In my case, there's one quite close called Stonehenge. So my intent was to link this crystal to Stonehenge. And when you make that intent, it's almost like digging a channel in the earth that water can flow, except in this case, it's the high vibrational energy from the energy center to your base crystal. And it's normally best if you can link it to two centers, then you can form a triangle, which makes the work stronger. And in my case, I linked one of the crystals to Glastonbury, which again is another local energy center that I know about. Again, if you're not too sure of the energy centers to use, then you can ask your spirit guide or be guided for an energy center to work with. And they don't actually have to be local. They can be anywhere on the planet, maybe a place you visited before. From an energetic point of view, once a link has been created, then distance and time really don't matter. So then, having got the base crystal in place, the next thing to do is to link together all of your smaller crystals, which are going to go around the outside of your garden, your fruit and vegetable area. And normally it's easier to do this in one go, and that is that you, by intent, hold the crystals, and you hold the base crystal, and by intent ask for the crystals to be linked together, and then find a location to put all of your crystals where they won't be disturbed. Normally it'll be on the perimeter of your vegetable or fruit area, and if you've got crystals with like a sharper point which is directing the energy, then they would need to go into your garden rather than out from the garden. If you have things like greenhouses or a larger garden, then you may have quite a number of extra crystals, and you can place those appropriately in other parts of the garden. And again, just check with a pendulum that you've got it in the right location, and try moving several locations until you get the correct location found. Then when you've got all the crystals in place, the next thing to do is just check whether your work is complete. And again, a pendulum check can be, are all the crystals in the right location? And the other question you can ask is, are they all energetically linked to the energy center? And if the answer to those is yes, then you'll have your high vibrational setting to grow your fruit and vegetables. Hi, we're going to move on to the soil, which is probably the most important part of any sort of gardening, particularly organic farming. And to do that, you've really got to get the mixture right. Now, a lot of people have either soil that's quite clayey, in which case when it gets hot, it gets really hard and solid. It's difficult for the roots to penetrate. Or they can have soil that's very sandy, in which case all the goodness and the water runs out and it's constantly dry. So neither of those two extremes is right. So we really need something in between, and digging in organic matter is a really powerful way to do that. Now, if you're doing that, and if it's a garden that's not been used before for growing vegetables, it's normally best to double dig. In other words, you dig a trench and then put the soil on one side, and then where the trench bottom is, you dig that again, and then mix vegetable organic matter of any sort in there, and that at least starts off the whole of the garden with a higher organic content, and it's useful for both clay or sandy soils. The things you can actually use for that is if you do your own compost, and we'll talk about a few tips about that later. You can use your own compost in there, or you can buy in the material to do it. Now, the tip that I was given about how to get really good soil is if you're having to buy it in, you buy it in two lots. You get organic rotted manure, and you get, although it's slightly controversial, you get peat moss and mix the two together, 50-50. Now, a lot of places are trying to not use peat moss because they think it's damaging the environment, and obviously that is an important consideration, but the alternatives really just aren't as good as peat. And if you really want to get the garden going until you can get your own compost in place, then I'd really recommend that. Just look at the soil here in the container. You can just see the goodness, and that's a mixture of 50% peat and 50% organic manure that have been mixed together. And this soil can either be used in a raised bed, and here's an example of a raised bed which I just really use as a soil mixing area, or you can put them into these canvas bags, which are much better than the tomato bags which are commercially available. The soil in there is terrible, really wouldn't recommend it. Mix your own soil, and when you do that and you put them in this canvas bag, you probably need a handful of fertilizer such as fish blood, and mix that in with it, and then you really won't need to put anything else. That will certainly last you the growing season. The other advantage of having these canvas bags is you can use the trays in which are designed for grow bags, and these just conveniently sit on the tray, so you can water them on the tray at the bottom. And if for any reason you want to move plants around, there's a couple of handles and you can just move them to another part of the garden. And this is an example of how a couple of the plants here have been moved to another part of the garden. Initially started off growing inside the greenhouse, and then they were moved to a new location partway through. So it's a very handy, easy way of working. So we're just going to move over to the compost heap, and I'm just going to talk to you about a few aspects of doing your own compost, because obviously that's going to be cheaper and you've got much more control of making sure that only organic contents go in there. I think one of the advantages of doing your own compost is because it's actually all in a high vibrational setting to start with, you're putting high vibrational soil in with your existing soil as opposed to buying it from outside. And also you can control far better exactly what goes in and what doesn't go in. This is a technique I use. This is a brought-in wooden 3-stage compost. And this is an idea that came from New Zealand, and the idea is that you start to fill in one part of the compost, being very careful to mix your browns, which you've got your nitrogen, and your greens, the browns which have got carbon, and the greens which have got the nitrogen, and water and air. And if you get that mixture right, it does mean quite a bit of digging, but you fill up one container, and when that container is totally full, you dig it all out, put it in the second container, and then use the first one to start putting in your new material. Then eventually when the first one is full, then you move the second one to the third, the first to the second, and then you've got a new container to work with. And in that way, by the time you've finished all of that, in the third container, you should have the soil ready to put, or the compost ready to put on the soil. And if you really want to pursue this in more detail, particularly the type of gardening that I do, which works really well with high vibrational organic gardening, is to put the compost on the surface after you've originally got the soil right, and about a couple of inches thick, putting a mulch over the entire top. The soil works in. There's a wonderful shepherd called Charles Darwin, and if you type in a video called No Dig, he'll go into great details of how he's pioneered this whole area, and find out that by putting your compost on the top by a couple of inches and doing that on a yearly basis, that it works its way into the whole of the garden, and the whole of the garden thrives rather than having to dig. And of course, it stifles any weeds, so it makes gardening much easier. The other thing you can see at the back here is something that I inherited. It's a plastic compost. I mean, it works. It's got little holes in. It's a little bit more difficult to get the compost out because you have to open up the front rather than just slide in these. But it equally works okay. And of course, you can do compost in a pile. You don't have to have it in a container. I have chickens around, so if I put it on the ground, in a couple of days, it's going to be spread over the whole garden. So for me, keeping them in a container is really helpful because I know where it is and then I can bring it out when needed. Okay, we're just moving into the area where the vegetables are grown and the fruit. And the first thing I just point out that you might find useful yourselves if you're doing raised beds is I've got wood chippings all the way along to suppress any of the weeds. It's very easy to get wood chippings because if you know a local tree surgeon, they have to pay money to have the chippings taken away by local companies. So if you talk to them, they'll often drop that on your drive for no charge, and all you have to do is wheelbarrow them around. And you can use wood chippings either to compost down, it just takes a bit longer to do that, and they add quite a bit of body to your compost, or you can just put them straight on the ground as I've done here, and this suppresses all the weeds, and it gives it a more natural feel and look about the place. But we're going to move on to another aspect of the soil, which is about the pH. And it really is important that you pay attention to this. We were talking before about how you get the right balance and the quality and the feel of the soil right, but the pH is equally important. The pH of about 6.5 is suitable for quite a lot of vegetables you're likely to grow. Some perhaps a little higher, some perhaps a little lower. You can check out the internet if you're not sure. If you need to make any adjustments, you can use a little bit of lime, which makes it slightly more alkaline, or you can use a flour of sulfur and it makes it slightly more acid. But if you do that, just use very small amounts, do it when there aren't any plants growing, it's over winter, and give it a few months before you go through and do the check. A simple pH meter like this works fine. This is just something that was bought off the internet. There's no battery to it. It's just got two different metals here which use a small electric charge depending upon the pH, and you can see it quite clearly on the meter. So one of the advantages of digging in the soil mixture I was talking about before, it's normally about 6.5, so if you dig that in, you'll probably find that's quite a natural way to get the sort of pH that you want. But there are some plants where you have to take a very special precaution, and blueberries like this are a good example. Blueberries won't tolerate alkaline soil, and you need to have a pH of about 5.5. And they also need very, very well drained soil as well. So the best way I found of doing it, because we've, under about 1.5 foot of here, we've got chalk, which would be disastrous for blueberries, is these are all in plastic containers and a plastic tub that's just sunk in the ground. And inside the tub was purpose mixed blueberry soil, which I simply went along to a specialist blueberry supplier, and they had bags of it. And it's designed to be well draining with a pH of 5.5. So you really don't have to do any changes at all to it. You get instantly the right soil. And I recently transferred these plants where the pH was 6.5 until I put new soil in, moved them over here in a bigger pot, and you can see for yourself that they're thriving and they produced a wonderful crop of blueberries this year. Okay, turning now to diseases. This behind me is a 2 or 3 year old apple tree, and for the first couple of years everything was fine, and then in the springtime I noticed that as the young shoots came out there was a lot of green fly on there and a lot of the leaves started to curl up, and then a little while later there were signs of a fungal attack, probably apple scab, which is quite a nasty fungal disease as apples can get. And when I went out to find how to treat it, then the gardening centres really only sold quite nasty chemicals to spray on that, which as an organic farmer is something I'm trying to avoid. So I had to do a little bit of investigative work, and I came across this particular product. It's organic neem oil, and it's made from the neem seeds themselves, which are squashed, and it has quite a lot of very useful properties. The first, for greenfly and similar types of smaller insects like that, it discourages them from going on the leaves. It can stop their normal growth cycle, particularly if it's sprayed on in the winter and there's various seeds and larvae and things like that that are in there. And it also kills some of them. So it's quite a useful product for tackling the greenfly side. And as I discovered, it's also quite useful for reducing the effects of apple scab and also fly fly, which is another quite nasty apple disease. Now, it's not quite as effective as the chemical alternatives, but what you really have to do in conjunction with this is to select varieties of apple and pear, the same sort of problems can apply to them, that are less prone to apple scab. So the first part is a preventative measure and picking the type of apple tree you want. And then if you're going to treat it with neem oil, then you take about a spoonful of neem oil in a spray container and you mix it with some liquid soap. Now the liquid soap can be the sort of liquid soap that you have at home, or you can get horticultural liquid. And the idea of the liquid soap is it helps the neem oil adhere to the leaves that you're squirting on. Now it's organic, it's perfectly harmless to eat, and the great thing with it is that once you spray, you get immediate results. And in my case, I was having a lot of leaves down here that were brown, and then after I sprayed it, all the new leaves that have been coming through have been exactly as they're meant to be, new, fresh, and vibrant. And the things you really need to remember if you are using neem oil is it really needs to be applied fresh. So, once you've made the mixture and you've sprayed it over the affected areas, then you need to really make it fresh the next time you have. And it can be used on a wide range of problems. It can be used on raspberries for raspberry curl. It can be used on strawberries to reduce mildew, apple and pear. I've sprayed it on tomatoes and cucumber, which in a greenhouse environment are more susceptible to mildew. So it's a very powerful product, and it's something that is highly recommended. Okay, I'd like to move on to another area of a pest that some attention is needed, and that's butterflies, particularly if you're growing cabbages, broccoli, or the brassica family. And one of the best organic ways of doing it is to have some sort of covering over it. And this is Euromesh, which is a very fine mesh that stops butterflies from getting through. It also stops carrot fly and various other pests. yeah, water can get through. And what I have here are fiberglass rods, which are specially designed to tuck in at either end of the raised bed that I have, so that the mesh can be covered over it with some weights around it just to hold it in place. So that's quite a useful way of doing it, and it avoids having to use sprays of various sorts to keep the caterpillars away. Another common pest, which are slugs. There's quite a lot of different ways of handling this organically, and I'm just going to talk about one that I came across that I found really powerful, and that's it's supplied by someone called Richard Jackson, who has a website where you can buy this product. And these particular pellets are based on ferrous phosphate, and the great thing with them is that if slugs eat them, they tend to bury into the soil, so you don't get slimy trails all over the place. They're harmless to wildlife, and because it's an organic product that breaks down into the soil, then it's quite a healthy thing for the soil afterwards when they've finished their life. The pellets are quite resistant to rain, so they do last for a while. They just need lightly sprinkling over the area. Okay, we're moving on to water, which is a very important part of growing high vibrational food. And it's really helpful to have one or more water butts that you can use. There's the example here is one that's connected to the side of a greenhouse, and it fills up very, very quickly. And if you have more of them, we have several of them around the house which we can use, then you can use that water for two purposes. First of all, remember, if this water has been stored in a high environmental setting, when you're watering your plants, you're watering it with water which has got a higher vibrational content rather than water that's just come in via the mains. But most importantly, particularly where we are, there's various additives that come in. We live in an area where there's quite high levels of lime, and a lot of plants don't really like that, and of course there's other additives that are put into the water. So if you can have natural water, it's much better, and particularly for things like blueberries really won't like water with lime that's coming from the mains. It's much better to use rainwater, and you happen to keep that pH at the level that's needed. When you do have your watering system, I would suggest you avoid sprays or things like that, because it's likely to create the conditions of mildew much more likely, which isn't something to encourage. It's much better to get a system where you either have something like a soaker pipe, or in my case, I have a hose pipe coming down here with a little switch that I can use, and I simply just take this hose wherever I want it and run the hose down a channel by the side of the vegetables that need it, and it's quite quick and easy to do it. But that's only if for some reason then there isn't enough rainwater to use. We're going to just talk about raspberries for a moment. These are first year raspberries, and the most important thing with raspberries is to give them lots of compost when you're digging them in. Really deep, lots of compost. They really thrive with that. And also, because there's this chippings over the top, it tends to keep a lot of moisture in, so it's quite a good way to grow them. One of the things I discovered is I bought quite a lot of new raspberries in, but I also bought some old raspberries that had been a bit neglected for a number of years. And when I planted all in, I actually discovered that the old raspberries had leaf curl, which is quite a nasty fungal infection, which can very quickly go through the whole of the raspberry crop. And the only way to really deal with it is to totally pull out all the affected raspberries and throw them away. So that was my old ones. My new ones were fine. But the fungal infection goes from plant to plant by greenfly. So it's really important that there aren't any greenfly on your raspberries. So again, this is where the neem oil and the washing up liquid or the horticultural liquid combination was able to get rid of the green fly, and just check every now and again, and there's no problem on these particular plants. A greenhouse is a really important part of any sort of food production that involves using high environmental energy. First of all, it's going to be in the high vibrational energy web that's been created. But you also need to get the conditions right in here. And a couple of tips for you is that's south facing for me. And I found one of the ways of cutting down a lot of the heat in the middle of summer is to put a netting over the top, which is strung along the top, and it just hangs over the side. And that really makes a big difference. You have to have an air ventilation flow so that the door is open and there's windows along here. And all of the tomatoes I mentioned before are going to be in their individual bags on trays, which are very easy to water because you can just water them at the bottom. And the other aspect that I'd just like to talk about is when you're doing seeds at the beginning of the year, it's really useful to be able to have heated conditions. I've got a PowerPoint here where I can buy organic seeds if possible. Sometimes it's not always possible, but they can always be grown. So the entire growing cycle is growing in a high vibrational setting. Okay, I'd just like to summarize what we've been talking about. The first thing to do is to create a high vibrational energy grid around the whole of your garden. And to do that, it involves having crystals and energetically linking your crystals to some high vibrational energy spots. And that creates a high vibrational energy that all of your fruits and vegetables can live in. As they grow, they'll absorb that energy so that when you eat it, then you're eating high vibrational food. The second area we talked about was the importance of getting the right sort of soil, and a lot of organic vegetable matter needs to be dug in initially. Or if it's an established vegetable area, then you can be putting a couple of inches of compost or other sort of vegetable matter on the top, and then allow over winter that to settle into the soil, and then you can plant directly on the top. That tends to keep down weeds, and the soil will absorb a lot of the content of it, and that needs to be done once a year. And we talked about how it's important to have a watering system and to use as much natural rainwater as possible, particularly for plants that are very sensitive to more alkaline type water. And we talked about with blueberries how that's quite important. And then we talked about diseases, and there's a lot that can be done with simple things like neem oil, where it can be sprayed over onto all sorts of crops. I've done it on tomatoes for when I had some mildew on some cucumbers. I put it on the apple trees, it's on the raspberry trees. Anything that gets any sort of fungal infection or green fly, you can use it. So it's a very, very powerful tool to use, and it's perfectly safe. The other area we talked about was about the protection for birds, particularly with fruits. And a fruit cage, although it's quite expensive, is a really good investment to make. If not, you really have to put the netting over the fruit and do your best to stop the birds from getting underneath it. And of course, for butterfly netting, for those plants that are susceptible to being damaged by butterfly and caterpillars. And then we talked about the greenhouse and getting the right sort of environment for bringing on your plants as soon as possible, and for growing plants that do thrive in a greenhouse, like tomatoes and chilies or peppers or whatever crops that you want to do. So those are some tips, and remember, the more food that you can grow organically, even though it may not be your total yearly consumption, you can freeze down what you don't use immediately in a lot of cases. And the more that high vibrational food that you eat, the more it will help assist you staying in a high vibrational state yourself.
Thank you, Andy, for such a fascinating video. If you would like to get more tips and techniques to embrace high vibrational living as we move and live in the new consciousness, feel free to subscribe to my channel down below. And I'll see you next time.